Hello and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaaj Maharaj, where nothing is off the table. For today's episode, I wanted to talk about the news coming out of Russia that their oil refinery has been bombed by the Ukrainians for the second time. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, I've got this post here on X from RKM Times, which says just in Russia predicts oil prices could exceed $150 as Ukraine bombs Russia's second largest refinery again. Now, why this is important is because as the Straits of Hormuz become policed by the Iranians and the world energy supply is being disrupted, causing a significant hike in the price of oil and gas. You find that Zelensky putting on this tantrums and taking out Russian energy infrastructure is not doing any good to the energy supply. And we know that he is acting on behalf of his European and British backers. However, this is causing the price of oil to escalate. Now, it doesn't help the world, but it helps the Russians. And if your aim is to try and disrupt the flow of Russian oil, then whatever Russian oil is making its way onto the market is now being paid for at a much higher price than what it would have had you not bombed the infrastructure in the first place. So, it really doesn't make sense. However, this is bound to infuriate the Americans because on the back of this, you've got rumors coming out of Moscow that the Russians are prepared to go back to the dollar-based system. So I suspect that the writing on the wall for Ukraine is there. It's abundantly clear. Europe is now staging its last effort in a battle against the United States, Europe and the UK. And they are using Zelensky as their proxy to assert some dominance in the world. And these actions by Zelensky are actually exacerbating the problem in the energy sector that the world is currently experiencing. However, once again, the oil exporting nations that are managing to get their oil out are the ones that are going to benefit. So the Americans are going to see a significant jump in their price they receive for the oil that they are selling. The Russians as well, for whatever oil of theirs makes it onto the market, they're gonna see a significant jump. Don't forget, Trump has desanctioned some of the Russian oil. The Europeans and the British still hold sanctions on Russian oil. In fact, Britain last week passed that regulation that Russian tankers straying into British waters can be boarded if they're carrying sanctioned Russian oil. So the world is being held to ransom by proxy wars being fought all around, from Ukraine right through to Iran, and proxy wars being fought by allies. Don't forget, the United States, the EU, and the UK are allies, but at this point in time, they are on opposing ends of the spectrum. And, the Russians signaling the will to want to move to the dollar trade system, that would have the Chinese worried because Russia is a founding member of BRICS. So if the Russians move to the dollar-based system, this then means that the leverage that the Chinese have is now becoming limited. And this plays into the hands of Trump because that is what Trump is trying to do. He's trying to drive a wedge between the Russian and the Chinese. A partnership that was solidified because of Biden and the EU and the UK's moves against Russia. And Trump sees that when the Americans need to take on the Chinese, they need to have the Russians along for the ride, or at least sitting outside rather than being actively involved in the conflict. So he's doing what needs to be done in terms of things from his side, and that is to drive a wedge between the Chinese and the Russians. And Zelensky is doing his best to make his irrelevance become relevant on the world stage, flying around to Saudi Arabia, trying to convince the Gulf states to do business with him, begging for money all over the world, and at the same time bombing Russian oil infrastructure. The thing I see coming out of this for Ukraine is that it's now, once the Americans decide that this is it and they've now completely washed their hands off Ukraine will capitulate. The Russians will take whatever they require, and Europe will be sitting having to, foster a Ukrainian state that is incapable of doing anything for itself. And Europe will then have to decide whether they want to carry that burden or they want to cut Ukraine loose and leave it as the basket case that is going to end up being. Zelensky is fine. He's stolen enough money and he'll be in a position to live out his days in a lot of luxury and comfort, assuming the Azov battalion or the CIA or MI6 or anybody else for that matter doesn't decide to take him out before. So we're keeping a close eye on this, and I want to thank you for spending time with us. We're looking forward to seeing you in the next episode. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, as it helps us with the algorithm and it helps our channel to grow.